Just as a housekeeping thing, at the bottom or somewhere on your screen, you will see something that says Q&A. Drop any questions that you have into that Q&A as we go. And there's also a chat thing if you want to talk amongst each other. I will also check that a little bit as we go as well. And let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen with you. We have some materials that we put together. And there will be plenty of time during this for question and answer. So please feel free, just drop that in kind of as we go. Anything that we don't get to as we go, we'll talk about it towards the end. And we'll have a good time. So as I said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and we will go ahead and get started. All right. So let me see how I can play this here because I have this thing at the top of my screen. Lots of fun. All right. So my name is Brad Schiller. I'm one of the founders as well as the CEO of a company called Prompt. We are the world's leading provider of feedback on college admissions essays. We work with more students on more essays than anybody else in the world by a good number. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is kind of all the things we've learned basically through that process and how you can actually take those on, as well as talking a little bit about our relationship with GEMS and My Path to Uni and kind of how you could take advantage of that to actually every single one of you that is looking to go abroad. And we highly recommend this, especially for students that are looking to potentially go to the United States, is to do what we call a one-on-one strategy session, actually, where you can just speak one-on-one with one of our essay coaches to actually talk about your particular situation and develop a strategy. And we'll talk more about that later. So usually before I kind of dive in and talk about the agenda for the day, I like to talk a little bit about my college application journey. So back when I applied for college, which seems like a long time ago now, but it wasn't too long ago. It was in 2002 is when I was filling out my college applications. Back then, people didn't apply to as many schools. So I only applied to 4 institutions. I applied to MIT, I applied to Stanford, I applied to Princeton, and the University of Illinois. That was it. Now, I knew nothing about the application process. I had no help on the application process. And so therefore, I wrote my essays fairly differently for these institutions. And I also didn't really realize what schools would even find compelling about me. So for example, for Stanford and for Princeton, my essays were about band and music, was kind of my primary essay. For MIT, which has a different type of essay that is written, these short essays, which we call supplements, which we'll get to later. One of my essays, I wrote about how I wanted to be a roller coaster designer. Well, guess what? I was rejected by Stanford and Princeton. Turns out that writing about music and band in your essay may not be the best choice, as we could talk a little bit about today. And I got into MIT. I also got into the University of Illinois. I ended up attending MIT, and clearly I'm a roller coaster designer now. No, right? I literally run a writing education company, which is very different than you wouldn't really think somebody going to MIT would be doing something with writing. It's a bit ironic. My 2 co-founders of Prompt, also MIT graduates in computer science, but it just so happens to be this case. And I always tell the story because whatever you're thinking about, students are thinking about going, whatever you're majoring in, especially if you're going to look to study abroad, there's a very good chance, and actually the data shows here in the United States, that 75% of college graduates end up going into a career that is not all that related to what they majored in. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. Right, you're young, you're going to major in something, good chance you're going to do something differently than what you may end up majoring in, and that is fine. That is okay, right? So you don't have to have like everything set in stone now. So agenda for today, we're going to talk about the importance of essays in the admissions process and how that varies globally. Next, We're going to talk about the purpose of the college application. We're going to do an introduction to what happens in college essays, which is what these types of essays are called, at least here in the United States. You might call them personal statements if you're applying to the UCAS, to the United Kingdom, for example. We're going to talk about myths writing the college applications. We're going to talk about what are the 5 traits that colleges are looking for in applicants. This is really critical and will help you get a much better understanding of what a college will find compelling about you, which we find is something that students really tend to struggle with. The families tend to struggle helping their students figure that out. We're going to talk about some best practices, kind of getting started, and how you can leverage us as a resource. Okay, so why are college admissions essays important? Now, this we're going to take a look at it from the perspective of the United States admissions process. Then we're going to talk briefly after this about Canada and the United Kingdom and other countries, just slightly different, where essays have slightly less importance in the admissions process. But right now we're going to focus on the United States. So this is the list from the National Association of College Admissions Counselors of the most important things in evaluating a student for admission. Now, it varies a bit based off of which school it is, but by and large, this is mostly correct. So the first thing they're looking at is your grades. Then they're looking at standardized test scores, such as the SAT and ACT. Then the third most important thing is your college admissions essays. Then it's extracurriculars and so on and so forth, okay? What's fascinating here, though, is that what's really fascinating is that high school grades, standardized test scores, like your IB scores, AP scores, whatever it is, what's fascinating about that is that students are actually self-selecting which college to apply to based off of those statistics. So in other words, when you are applying to university, the population of students that you are competing against to get into that university have very similar grades and test scores to you, generally speaking. And what therefore sets students apart is the writing aspects, basically the student's story as part of the application process. So here in the United States, there's basically, you can kind of think of it as a matrix that schools use. There's 2 pieces of the scoring system that most schools use. One is the your academic score, right, which is basically grades, standardized test scores, etc. Kind of the quality of curriculum actually at your high school does matter quite a bit as well in that process, which ties into your grades. Then the other score is what we call a personal score. And that personal score is very much based off of your admissions essays, what you've done kind of for extracurriculars, and in particular, how you write about what you've done for your extracurriculars. Your interest in attending that specific college does matter for some institutions, which we'll get into in a second, of what we call the why us essay, like why are you applying to the school. Your letters of recommendation, which you can also have an effect on, which we'll talk about later if you're interested, as well as if the school actually has an interview. Now, what's important here to understand is, and what we'll be talking about today is, what really matters is understanding what a college will find compelling about you, so you know actually how to present yourself in the application. I'll give you an example. So when I was applying to university, I talked about how for Stanford and Princeton, I wrote about the wrong things in my essay, right? For MIT, I kind of maybe wrote about some more of the right things. But as it turns out, there was also a lot of other compelling things about me that did not show up in my Stanford and my Princeton applications. For example, when I was in high school, we have things here in the United States called advanced placement exams, which are somewhat similar to the IB curriculum, or maybe some A-levels classes that you're taking over there. And what I did is that I said, okay, you know what? My school doesn't actually offer some of these exams, for example. And so what I did was I decided I would just study for the exam, take it myself, and I got a really good score on it. All right. This was just normal for me, right? Like I was like, okay, like I kind of want to learn this material. I want to, get some college credit for it. I'll just do it. My school doesn't offer it. Now, it turns out that that's actually really compelling to a college. Okay. I had no idea. This did not find its way onto my Princeton application, my Stanford application. The only way it actually found its way onto my MIT application, apparently, after I kind of read I actually have a copy of it, and I read the notes from the admissions officers, is that it somehow came up in my interview, like unintentionally. I don't know why it came up in my interview, but it actually came up in my interview. And so they thought that was really compelling. It was one of the few kind of like, there's like maybe 5-10 sentences of notes about me, and that's one of them. Okay, so just to give you a sense of it, it's really important to understand what a college will find compelling about you, especially because something that may be really interesting about you is maybe just normal to you, and so you're not going to include in the application. We'll talk more about like how to think about that later, but this is really critical as part of the application process here in the United States, is really understanding what content, what story do I need to tell, and then to write that in a very compelling way, not just on your essays, but also on your resume, et cetera, et cetera. In the international, like outside of the United States, the admissions process, for example, for the United Kingdom, the UCAS essay, which we'll talk about more about what goes within that essay, is quite a bit different. And in general, those essays in the United Kingdom, Canada, other countries, tend to be less important in the admissions process, but they're also much more straightforward to write. So in other words, you should still get some support on them. However, it's not going to be like a make or break critical defining factor in terms of whether or not you get into a university. Whereas here in the United States, for students that are kind of within this population of similar students at a given school, so they haven't separated themselves, this becomes the critical deciding factor. All right, I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to check to see if there's any Q&A that's come in. It doesn't appear to be that way, but feel free to just drop in any questions as we go. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is, and I go into lots of high schools, my team goes into lots of high schools, we give workshops, and the first question that we ask is, what is the goal? Basically, what is the purpose of filling out a college application? Most students struggle to answer this. Most think, well, it gets me into university, right? I have to do it. And that's the mindset. Whereas the mindset that you really want to take going in as you're working on your applications is that you want to prove in your application, through your application, that you will be successful in college and beyond. What does that mean? It means that you will actually graduate and you will do well in your classes at school. Next, you will contribute positively to the to the college's community in some way. Third, you'll have a positive impact on whatever you choose to do in the future. And fourth, that this particular college will actually put you on a path to achieving your goals or help you achieve your goals. And all of this kind of lends itself to just having this mindset of, which is really critical, like that when you're working on your application, you have to ask yourself, will this prove that when I'm writing that I will be successful in college and beyond? And how do you prove it is actually through your experiences. And so there are basically 5 traits that colleges look for, which we'll get to in a second. But before we do that, we're going to talk a little bit about college essays, admissions essays overall. So there's basically a few types of essays. The first is the personal statement essay. There's a United States style essay, which is commonly called the common application essay. It's the most common one written here. You use the same essay across multiple applications, and you usually start working on it in the summer. Then there's the UCAS type style of essay, which I call statement of purpose. We call it personal statement. And it is also what's very similar to what's used in Canada, many schools in Australia, etc., which is much more of a, here's what I'm planning to do in my life, here's what I've done previously, etc. And so they're looking for different things within each essay. And we'll talk about the US style first, but a lot of the stuff that you hear about proving that you'll be successful at college or beyond is really important in kind of all types of essays. Just how you write about it, what content you include will be important. Then you also have in the United States what we call these like supplemental essays. So a lot of universities here have extra essays that you need to write. So typically these are schools that we have a group of schools that we call essay intensive schools, which are typically the top 25 to 30 in rankings here in the United States. And these have like multiple additional essays you need to write. So for example, Stanford has like 7 extra essays beyond kind of this common application essay you need to write. MIT has 5. Columbia has 7. Brown has a bunch of them, which is an Ivy League institution. Cornell, Ivy League institution, only has 1, for example, but it's a longer supplemental essay. So the average student that we find that's applying to essay-intensive competitive schools here in the United States, actually writing 20 or more essays as part of the application process across all of their schools. Okay, and the most common of these types of essays is they'll ask you, why do you want to apply for the school? Or why are you interested in this particular major? Or describe an activity that you've done or work experience that you've had that is particularly meaningful to you and why. Okay, and these essays, you usually can't start working on them until August because the schools will release new ones in August, and there's about a 30% per year turnover just in terms of like updates to essay prompts. Okay, I think we had a question that came in, so I'm gonna see, just kind of grab it really quick before. Yeah, so we have a question here that's on giving counseling during the application process. I'll cover that at the end. The answer is yes on the admission on essays. We don't work with students on kind of on deciding like which universities they want to apply to and such. There's a number of people that do that out there. And I know that through my path to uni with GEMS, they have a relationship. I think it's with IDP. That's actually quite helpful with some of these things, but you can ask them for more recommendations there. But we are kind of the partner on the essay side because our mission is to make people better writers. Okay, so that's kind of our primary focus, and I'll get to that kind of towards the end. So let me go ahead and I'm going to continue sharing my screen and we'll kind of get back to this. I just want to make sure that we're covering some questions as we continue to go along here. All right. So the next thing that I want to cover before we get into like your experiences and what types of experiences you want to write is that there's a few myths that we find that students commonly have actually throughout the admissions process and actually working on their essays. And a lot of this is because of kind of misinformation that's out there on the internet, as well as if you look up examples of good college admissions essays, you find a lot of essays that are actually not that good. Okay. So sometimes students get into a given institution in spite of their essay instead of because of their essay. Okay. Additionally, many of the examples of really good essays you'll see online are really well written, like beautifully done essays that may actually be really good. However, they have a lot of like, you may not be able to pick out the traits of what actually makes the essay good. You might just think it's really good writing that makes the essay good, and that's not the case. It's really good content is what makes the essay good, okay? So there's a few things that are really critical here to understand. One is there's this myth of universities, colleges wanting well-rounded students. Yes, while being good at everything actually does help, that's actually not necessarily what colleges are looking for. And this goes both within the United States as well as internationally. They're looking for students who truly, really excel at one or a few things. Okay, we call these things spikes. So it may be like a very particular, like maybe you're like really obsessed with like climate change and the environment. We saw a ton of essays kind of related to that this past year. And guess what? You should focus on that and like really make sure your obsession with that and you're learning about that and your what we call intellectual curiosity really comes through. Writing from the sense of, hey, I'm I do a bunch of leadership stuff. I'm also a really good team player. I also have interest in like 5 different things, right? That's a little bit less compelling. Like focus on the stuff that really makes you, you. Next. So a lot of essays that we see, people decide they want to tell a narrative about their life story, right? So a lot of this might be their family history or something about their culture. This is not that compelling either. Now, it sometimes works for some students who have like overcome very significant challenges in their life that they need to focus on. But for the vast majority of students that we tend to work with, and probably on this call as well, is that you should probably focus on something else, which we'll get to in the 5 traits. Like, so what makes you, you? What are your spikes? What are you truly like really interested in, or what problems or challenges have you overcome? It doesn't have to just tell me about like, you know, I'm from the United Arab Emirates, you know, and I have done XYZ, like my family is this, right? That's not that interesting. You also don't need to be creative or thought-provoking. So when you see these examples of essays online, a lot of times they're really creative. They're very well written. Guess what? That is like less than 1/10 of 1% of students are writing those types of essays. And that's not just 1/10 of 1% of students. That's like literally 1/10 of 1% of students that are actually getting into the top universities. Okay. So you don't actually have to be this beautiful writer. What really, you don't have to use analogies and metaphors or to be like really philosophical or thought-provoking. But you don't need to do that. What really matters is the content and making sure that it's presented in a very clear and concise way, right? An admissions officer is only going to spend 1 or 2 minutes actually reading the essay, and they need to be able to very quickly understand who the student is in that period of time, right? So they're looking for, is this student going to be successful in college and beyond? That's the question they're trying to answer. And saying that, you know, your mind is like a black hole sucking in, you know, knowledge is not, doesn't help that. Okay, and I've actually seen that analogy used multiple times in essays, so that's why I'm just bringing it up. Okay, so next, how do you prove that you will be successful? Your experiences are your proof. There are basically, you know, we reviewed tens of thousands of admissions essays a year. Okay, and we've kind of distilled everything that really makes for effective college applicants and applications into 5 specific traits that colleges are looking for. The first is drive. So you ideally want, you know, colleges are looking for students who are going to succeed no matter what and no matter how long the odds are. And you prove that by showing that you've been through difficult situations in the past and you've come out a better person. This could be anything from, you know, some significant difficulties that you may have had in kind of your upbringing and family life, to anything that's like, hey, I saw this problem in my community or at my school and I wanted to solve it. Okay. So that first is drive, just like a willingness, like a want to succeed, like no matter how long the odds are. That's a really critical trait and probably the most important of these 5, okay? Because students that are perseverant are going to be more successful in life. Also, if you're perseverant, you're going to be more successful kind of throughout your life, be more successful in college, all that. The second is intellectual curiosity. So these are students who really like to learn just for the fun of it in their free time. And there's like particular like topics or areas of interest that they're really deeply interested in, and they're spending a good amount of time doing that. Now, we find that this is something that a lot of students have, a lot of intellectual curiosity, but they don't write about it on their applications because they're not aware that this is something they should be writing about. Because, hey, being interested in this one thing is just normal. It's normal for you, but it actually may not be normal for other people, okay? And so you want to make sure that this comes across in your application if you really are an intellectually curious person. So in my case, when I was applying to university, I was writing about band, music. I was really into music. So very good musician back in the day and got lots of awards. Guess what? Being great at music doesn't necessarily prove that I'm this really intellectually curious person. It doesn't, it sometimes could prove a little bit on drive, but that's not proving like being great at music doesn't necessarily translate to being great in college, in the classroom, or being in the future. Now, if I had written more about, hey, if I had just even dropped in a line about, hey, my schools didn't offer these AP exams, I decided I would just learn them anyways and take it, the material, and I did really well, that would be pretty compelling, okay? Didn't do that. I totally didn't do that. At the same time, on my MIT application, when I talked about being a roller coaster designer, it was because I was really interested in physics, okay? And I was able to talk about that and kind of intellectual curiosity associated with that. Got it? Next topic is initiative. So these are students who are very entrepreneurial and not willing to accept the status quo. So basically, whatever they're a part of, whatever organization they're within, they're always thinking of ways to improve upon it. And they're always acting on those things to actually make things better. This is something that colleges really like because it means that these students will contribute to the community, but also you're more likely to be successful in life because you're always seeing something, you're always kind of taking on some sort of leadership type role to execute and make it better. Next, contribution. So these are students who make their community, school, organization, basically peer group, any group of people they're a part of, better as a result of their involvement and their actions. This is really helpful because colleges are looking to build a great community of students who kind of support each other. And so students that are naturally just contributors to others will do very well there. And then finally is diversity of experiences. So when I talk about the myth of a well-rounded student, well, a college is trying to build a well-rounded class. So in other words, people with different experiences from different parts of life and have different interests and all of that sort of stuff, kind of bringing it together to add kind of all of these people with different unique perspectives about the world to their student body. They also want to make sure that not everybody that's going to go to their school is going to go into finance, a career in finance, for example. They want to make sure that their graduates are going to have a larger impact on all sorts of areas of the world and economy. And this one in particular, are schools like Harvard and MIT and others like that are really interested in having a wide array of different types of students with different interests and backgrounds and all that sort of stuff, because they want their graduates to have a very positive and unique impact on the world. Okay, so I'm going to pause here because usually there's some questions that pop up that are associated with this, but these are kind of as I said, the most critical stuff. If you're thinking about what makes you compelling from the perspective of a university, like that is the entire purpose of what you need to do. We, as our writing coaches, this is what we do, right? We kind of start this process by kind of helping you identify what these are. We also have just a bunch of tools that you can access actually within the Prompt platform at prompt.com/gems. I'll put that up later, or you can access it through the My Path to Uni website that can actually kind of help you brainstorm a bunch of your experiences as it relates to these 5 critical traits as well. So let me go ahead and see if there's some questions that may have popped up. Please drop them in. This is a good time that we always get some questions. So I will stop my screen share and take a look at these. So we have a question. Personal statement is a general essay, and then subject-specific ones are extra ones. Are they required as well? Okay. So this personal statement that we were just talking about is, so for example, if you're applying to the United Kingdom, you're writing the UCAS essay, that's it. Okay, just one essay. That tends to be the case for schools in Canada and most of the time in like Australia, New Zealand, many other countries as well, if they even have an essay. It's part of the admissions process. For the United States, many of the schools your students are likely applying to will have additional essays that are required. So they will write this general essay, that's a personal statement, called the Common Application Essay. And then on top of that, they will write these supplemental essays that are additional information that that particular school wants. Okay, and those may be different essays across different schools. It might be, why do you want to apply to Columbia? Or why do you want to major in engineering at Princeton, for example? It may be, there's like this famous essay that's like called the roommate essay for Stanford. It's like, what do you want your roommate to know about you and why? Okay. So these are, there's all sorts of kind of different essays. They're of different lengths. Some of them are as few as like 35 to 50 words. Some of them are 500 plus words. But there's like a lot of those. Okay. Good question here. So how do you not overdo it? Like, how do I write my essay and show the type of person I am without sounding pretentious? Okay. Well, the answer to that is that by just telling about your experiences and what you learned about yourself from those experiences, it's very hard to sound pretentious. Saying instead that, hey, I'm this amazing person, you should admit me because I am amazing, that's different, right? And here's why. And the reason for that is like, if you are just giving facts, right? If you are just relaying, this is what's happened to me, this is how I reacted to it, this is what I did, that's something that is never going to sound like pretentious because it's actually what you did. Okay. And so we find that as long as you are kind of telling that without like embellishing or using these like what we call superlative adjectives that just don't really add much value, but to show me that you are this great student, that is pretty important. And what we see is like commonly in recommendation letters that teachers are writing, this tends to be a bit of a problem sometimes. Okay. Because recommendation letters, a lot of teachers will say, hey, the student is fantastic, one of the best students I've had. But they say that for a lot of people, okay, a lot of students. What schools really want to know is what particular things, examples, like actual concrete examples of things that you've done in your life that show me that you're going to be successful, right? That's why we talk about experiences. Like, what experiences have you had? What anecdotes? Like, what things have happened in your life that will show me that you have these 5 traits? And usually, you don't have to have all 5 of these traits. You might have a spike in 2 or 3 of them, and those are the ones you want to have come across on your application. And this is also why, a good reason why you want to work with an essay coach through this process. And the reason for that is that they will tell you if you're coming across sounding very, very poorly in that process. Okay. So let me go ahead. If there's no other questions right now, we'll take more questions at the end, but there's a few things that additional things that I want to cover. And then wrap up. Take any final questions. All right. Now we've talked about how we proved to be successful. We're going to talk about a couple of just common essay structures, just to give you a flavor of like, how do these essays generally work? So for the US style kind of like generic common application essay, which is like the one that will be used across multiple schools, the general structure is you have an introduction. That's what I call the journey essay. So you have an introduction that sets some sort of scene of what's going to happen, and you drop some hints as to what is to come in the essay. So this is kind of like what we call using like the hero's journey structure, which is what almost every movie, every story ever told uses. So in other words, like if you're watching a movie, you probably have a good sense of what the ending is likely to be within the first minute or 2 of the movie. It's the same situation here, okay, where you want to be pretty clear from the beginning what is likely to come. So that way your reader is like, okay, I get it. I understand why you're writing about this. Otherwise, if they read your first part of your essay and they're left thinking, how is this relevant? Like, why is the student even writing about this? That's not good. Next, in the journey essay, what we do is like, we have this like critical experience that you're going to talk about in your essay where you're one person before that experience, and then after you've done this experience, you're this like new, different type of person. Okay. So before, the first part of your essay is going to cover what's before. So like, who were you before this anchor experience? So this really important experience in your life. So that way you can draw a contrast between who you were and who you are today. So an example I always use is, let's say a student is overly shy, okay, but went through this journey where they realized that, hey, other people actually like them, they like being around them, and now they've kind of come out of their shell a little bit and are less shy, right? So they're still probably fairly introverted, but they're interacting with other students, they're kind of going out of their way to have those interactions, etc., and they feel more confident and better about themselves. So if that's the example that we're going to do, the before part of that is like who you used to be, like when you were shy, like, and give some actual examples. For example, it could be, oh, I was invited to be a part of some organization and I said no because I was worried what people would think about me. Next is what we call during, which will make up about a third of your essay. So the introduction plus this before part is about a third of your essay. The during is about a third of your essay, which is like what actually happened during this anchor experience. So if you were really shy, maybe you had this experience where you said, hey, somebody asked me to do something, and this time I said yes. And I realized that I really had a good time doing it, right? I did X, Y, and Z. I had some sort of positive impact. I actually engaged with other people, and they really liked me, and all of that. Then what we have is called the after part. So what I also call the new you. So what did I actually learn about myself as a result of that experience? And then how did I actually put those learnings into practice? So in other words, what actions have I now taken since then to go do something? And so what we find here is that I may have learned, oh, well, I actually really enjoyed working with other, doing stuff with other people. People like being around me. I don't have to worry about, saying something wrong. And so that's what I learned about myself. And now I've gone and done other things, right? So I even joined this other organization and now I have like a leadership role, right? And I've had some positive impact on my community or other things like that. And then I tie that to the students' future ambitions, where they might say, hey, I want to, because of the situation, I want to help other students that are in similar types of situations as me. And, I'm really interested in going into something related to like psychology because of it. Okay. So there's like a whole kind of general structure here where you've gone through this journey, you've had this experience in your life or a set of experiences in your life that have changed you and kind of led you down this path to who you are now and what you may want to do in the future. That is kind of the US style essay. It's what I call the journey structure. There's other structures you can use, but the vast majority of students use this one. For the UCAS essay, it's very different, right? And this is very similar, as I said, for Canada, other countries as well. So I just call it the UCAS style of essay, which is more of what we call a statement of purpose. So in this, they want you to focus much more on your academics and kind of what major you're planning to go into and kind of your experiences all related with that. So it's much more straightforward. You don't have to be, you could even be less creative than the United States style one. And so you just kind of, in your introduction, provide an overview of what will be covered, like what courses you're going to do and what your ambitions are, at college in the future. You then talk about your firsthand experiences, which is kind of basically what have you done actually related to your intended areas of study, like what have you done already that kind of show that, hey, you actually really are interested in this and you've already done some stuff related to it. Academic preparation, which is the academics you've done to actually prepare yourself. So what classes maybe you have taken to prepare yourself for this line of study. You then what's called core and other experiences, which are other experiences that cover kind of your traits that actually will relate to success actually at the university. So maybe you've had some experiences with leadership, teamwork, these 5 traits that we talked about, like building on your intellectual curiosity, initiative, all that. And then you just kind of wrap up and provide a look to the future. So the UCAS structure of essay, UCAS essay is typically 500 words long. The one for the United States style of essay is actually 650 words long is the typical length, which is pretty important. So a few things here just to keep in mind. And I'll just cover a couple of things and then we'll get to questions at the end. One, these essays are not hard. Okay, they don't need to be perfect. Not every single word needs to be perfect. doesn't need to be like super creative or philosophical. The key is presenting really compelling content about your experiences in a very clear way, right? You want to prove that you're going to be successful in college and beyond. And what's really important, and I highly recommend doing a strategy session with one of our coaches, because in a strategy session, we'll talk with you about individual things that you could do between now and when you start working on your essays to make your content more compelling, okay? Because you need to gain additional experiences. And a lot of these things are things you could do at home, right? Even though you're in some sort of quarantine type state. Next, don't procrastinate, right? So the number one reason that we find students procrastinate is they don't know where to start. So parents, you should feel very supportive for your students. Make this process feel a lot less daunting, okay? And the big thing here is make sure you're not, so like a lot of students, like thousands of students come to us literally within 3 weeks of a deadline for university. And don't do that, right? Get started actually in the summer. It gives you a good amount of time. You could spend the time necessary, which is not even that much, but you're just less stressed about it. You get the essays done. We recommend having all of your essays done by September 1st, kind of before kind of like the meat of the fall semester really kicks off. And at least for your top 3 choice schools. Getting feedback on your writing is really critical. And it's really important to actually be smart about how you actually go about doing this. So we find so many students that go out to like 20, 30 people and get feedback on their essay. You don't need feedback from 20 or 30 people. What you need is feedback from people who really know what they're doing in the process. That could be your school counselors, that could be your teachers, that could be us, that could be some other essay coaches, but you want them to have a really, really deep understanding of this particular types of admissions essays, okay? We find that the vast majority of students who are not working with some sort of essay coach and are kind of doing this on their own have 2 to 3 very significant opportunities to improve their content in each essay that they're missing. Next, the common application essay, as I said, a lot of people spend like 20, 30, 50 hours on this. It should take you 6 to 8 hours to have something really good over a 2-week time period. Okay, you want to get that done in June or July, then you can focus on your supplemental essays in August as needed. And the big thing now is, and we see this all the time when students come to us in October, is that there are certain things they could have done, but done earlier, like actually done, even stuff that may have taken just a few weeks to greatly improve the content of their essay. So if you, for example, one of the most common things we see is a student that writes about some community service experience that they've had that was really important to them. But the big question in my mind is always, well, you did this one community service experience, you say you've learned something about yourself, now prove that to me. What else have you done as a result of that? And the answer is a lot of students haven't done anything else, right? They did some few day community service experience like a few months ago or a year ago, and then they haven't really done anything since then. And that's not good, okay? So there's certain things that you could do basically to set yourself up to have a much more compelling essay, depending on what your experiences are and what you've write about. It's very individualized, and that's what we cover in strategy sessions. So a little bit more about us as a company. We were founded in 2014, 3 MIT grads. Our mission is to make people better writers. We happen to work with college admissions essays because it's high stakes. It's actually one of the best times to improve writing skills because students are willing to take the feedback on their essay and to act on it. We have 150, growing quickly, number of writing coaches actually within our tutoring network. This is a very elite group of people. We accept actually less than 2% of applicants. We just kind of reran some analysis. Less than 2% of people who actually apply to be on our network actually make it. Those are the people that you are working with as essay coaches. They have backgrounds typically as, from a typical person is from like a top 50 school, has great like advanced degrees in many cases, and are either have been an educator or are a writing professional of some kind. So we have people that are playwrights, screenwriters, professors, professional journalists, authors, etc. in our network. And we have this whole platform that kind of keeps you organized throughout the entire process. And for parents out there, what we do is we have this thing where we are continuously reaching out to your students to make sure they're getting their work done earlier. Okay, so our goal, and we actually guarantee this if you sign up with us earlier, is to get your students done with their essays for their top 3 choice schools by September 1st. So we have free strategy sessions. We highly recommend each individual student signs up for this. This is unique, special for GEMS students. We review tens of thousands of essays a year. And as we said, the biggest issue that we find is not the writing, it's actually the content. So talk with us now so you understand what can you do over the next few months to actually improve your content and lead to significantly better essays and applications. These are like 45-minute sessions with one of our writing coaches. We dive into specific things you are likely going to write about in your application essays, and then talk about, okay, what about these things? Like, what can we do now, between now and later, to actually add additional content that will make your applications much more compelling. You can access this and sign up for a free strategy session at prompt.com/gems or mypathtouni.com. You'll find us on that website as well. Finally, like just in terms of how we work, there's 2 ways. One is through packages, which we recommend for students applying to US universities, where you have like a writing coach specifically assigned to you. We have an accountability coach, which I was talking about, to make sure that you actually stay on track, and we're messaging you and all that sort of stuff to make that happen. We do video coaching calls to kind of get you started, not with just a strategy session, but as you start writing certain essays. You'll do video calls before you actually start writing them, so you have a plan and an outline of what you're going to do before you actually write it. And you get essay feedback on all of your essays, as much as needed. And those packages, you can find all the pricing on mypathtouni.com or prompt.com/gems. And the good news there is that all GEMS students are basically getting a 20% discount from prompt.com. The other option is you could just pay as you go. You can just buy individual reviews or coaching calls. This is a better strategy, really, for students that are only applying outside of the US, like UCAS school, UCAS essay, etc. Just because there's a lot less to write about, and the typical student needs about 3 drafts of their essay for that type of essay. And you can kind of just sign up, you buy reviews, and you get credits for those. Okay. We also do some needs-based pricing as needed if you're like going to go abroad on some sort of scholarship, like a government-sponsored scholarship or something like that. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop. I'm going to take some questions, and feel free to drop them in, and then we'll wrap up. But this is, hopefully you all have found this super valuable as we've gone through this. And are there any topics that you wouldn't recommend writing about for the anchor essay, right? So your anchor experience, right? Your common application essay. This is a great question, and the answer to that is it depends. That's the answer to everything, honestly. And the reason for that is there are a bunch of types of essays that are topics that are less compelling, right? So like writing about bands tends to be less compelling. Now, that doesn't mean that every student shouldn't write about band, because there's certain things that maybe you have certain experiences that are associated with band that show initiative or contribution, like in droves, right, or drive, okay? So what really matters is that I firmly believe that any topic for any essay can be really compelling. However, you have to make sure those 5 traits, or 2 or 3 of those 5 traits, come out in a significant way. So, but in general, topics that tend to struggle with to show their traits are like band, athletics, writing about, for example, that times they got like bad grades and needed to like work harder to improve. Those typically are not great essay topics. There's also a whole bunch of other ones that are just harder to write about, such as, hey, I went on some mission trip somewhere and that's all you wrote about, right? Because you say it changed you, but you didn't actually act on that experience, or community service. But you did that one community service experience, but then you didn't act on that and do more different things as a result of that experience. So those are the types of things that we typically see tend to students tend to struggle with. Doesn't mean that you can't write about it, but there's kind of a little bit of a higher bar in terms of like some of the content that needs to be covered. Another good question. I'm interested in studying psychology or neuroscience, but I haven't learned much about it. Or things like volunteering and work experience. How do you suggest strengthening my application? Okay, great question. So I think this is really important, especially for like the UCAS style essays, but also here in the United States. If you have certain ambitions for the future, try to do stuff now related to those ambitions. So in other words, if you're really interested in psychology and neuroscience, back when I was applying to school, it was hard to learn about some of this stuff, okay? Maybe you could pick up some textbooks, read about it, whatever, get some journals. Now, there's entire online classes. There's communities that you can engage with online. So what I would recommend is saying, okay, put together almost like a self-learning plan. So maybe there's like a Coursera or edX, which I think is fantastic, which is a joint MIT-Harvard collaboration, where you can actually take some classes like online, right? And these are even free classes. You can learn content online, right? You can do stuff. You can engage with other people who are associated with that. And that looks really great because it shows what we call self-learning and intellectual curiosity. So I would, this is the type of stuff that we cover in strategy sessions of like, what do you go do? Like, what is your learning plan? What are you going to go do over the next few months before you start working on your essays? And that is something that like I highly recommend doing, especially because you're going to get questions, not just like the main essay that you need to write, but also like, why are you wanting to do this major, right? In the UCAS essay, that's part of the essay. Like, why? What is your intended area of the study? And like, what have you done related to it so far? And for a lot of students, it's like, I want to major in psychology and I have done nothing related to it, okay? So anything that you could do that shows like, yes, I've actually like thought through this. I'm intellectually curious. I actually learn on my own. Those are things that are super compelling. And that's why like, I highly recommend doing one of these strategy sessions to get started now. Any other questions before we kind of wrap up? As I said, prompt.com/gems, or you can go to the mypathtouni.com website. And through there, you can access, a free strategy session, which is unique for you all to kind of get things kicked off, as well as you get kind of, so like basically what amounts to is a 20% discount on working with us through GEMS. Okay, we're going to give 20 more seconds, see if there's any other questions that come in. If not, we'll wrap up. As I said, my name is Brad Schiller. If you want to reach out to me directly, my email is brad@prompt.com. You can also chat live with one of us on our website, prompt.com/gems. In the bottom right, you'll see a little chat button. But as I said, I highly recommend getting started. I highly recommend getting started now, at least with the strategy session. You can then make your decision to work with us either now, later, and all that sort of stuff. Good question here. What if I don't have a struggle for my narrative hero story? That is fine. Okay, you don't have to have a struggle, right? It's more of related to a challenge or something that is what I call time of personal growth. Is a really good topic to write about. So a time of personal growth could just be some time where you found your skills drastically improving as a result of something that your own actions. Okay, so that in athletics, let's say you are a soccer player, or football, as you call it internationally. Here in the United States, we call it soccer, and you found that you were really not very good, but you started working on a daily basis to improve your skills. But instead of just like going out and running or doing normal practicing, what you did is you actually like really tried to analyze and study what the greats are doing. Okay, so like what Messi and some of the others are doing, Salah, etc. So you really study some of their moves and you work on like imitating those, right? And then starting to put those into practice and all that sort of stuff. And that could be really compelling, right? So it's basically, think about, it could also be a period of self-learning and self-realization where you found like a topic that you were really, really deeply interested in, like psychology or neuroscience or whatever, and you decided, I'm going to learn a lot about this. And you just like dive into the weeds. You could talk about like how you your own intellectual journey to learn more about something and kind of some of the realizations that you have, right? And so, yes, the next webinar, I think next Wednesday, is going to focus even more kind of in depth on UCAS and that sort of thing. We talked a little bit of a highlight on those today, but we'll actually be able to take a look at some examples and kind of like break down exactly what we need to do for those types of essays as well. And we have another question that came in on the selecting the prompt on the Common Application essay. Notice how we did not talk about the prompts on the Common Application essay at all today. And the reason for that is there is a prompt that works for any topic. So in other words, first you choose what you want to write about, then you choose the prompt, okay? That's the order of operations. Too many people see a prompt that they like and then end up writing about something that's not the most compelling thing about them. By and large, best prompts to write are, I think it's number 5, which is on a time of personal growth. That's very much tied to the journey essay. Number 6 is kind of about intellectual curiosity, great topic to write about. And number 1, which is kind of about like your background or identity. Those are the ones that are that. And by the way, that's as the highest percentage of students that typically write about those topics. However, like don't pick one like challenging a belief, for example, is I think it's number 3. Don't pick it just because less people write it. There's a reason why less people write it, because it's much harder to write. Like, you're not getting extra points here for writing something that is so you're not getting extra points here for writing something that has a higher degree of difficulty, right? What really matters is the content of your essay. All right. Any other questions? I think we're about to wrap up. Hopefully you all have a great evening over there. I will have try to have a great rest of my afternoon and all that sort of fun stuff over here in the United States. And as I said, feel free to reach out with any questions that you may have. I hope you found this all really useful. Bye-bye.